Hey, Seth, good morning.
Hey Reed, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. Glad it's another Friday. How's your day going?
It is the middle of the day, so all the stressors are alive and well.
You always think that Fridays are like the down days, right? People don't need anything on a Friday, and then you realize, oh no, all the questions that they had on Wednesday and Tuesdays, they finally answer because wait, it's the end of the week. I have to push everything through before Monday now.
Yeah, it's certainly the hopeful day because the calendar is a little less booked with meetings, so you're hoping to get some development in, but it typically doesn't work out like that.
Yeah. My one trick at least is I do have a permanent block on my calendar from 1 to 4 p.m. that's always reserved. So even if people wanted to and look at it, like nobody can ever book spots in that time. It's been permanently
This
blocked off.
this is something I should do. I should absolutely do is just block times.
You're right. Yeah, it's like if you I call it deep think time. It's basically my one time of the week where I've allowed myself 4 hours of uninterrupted time to do whatever I need to catch up from the rest of the week. But yeah, it can be hard to find that much time uninterrupted.
The trick with that is you have to never tell anybody that you're doing it. Otherwise, they'll know
Crap.
that you're blocking time.
All right. We'll edit this out. Right there you go.
Yeah,
Just
right.
cut out the first few minutes of this video. But yeah, like I'm excited you're on here today. I've for the people tuning in, I've known you, Seth, and both you and Mike for quite a few years now. I think the first time I met you, you two were presenting at the Modern Excel User Group here in the Redmond area, probably 4 years ago. I think something
Oh
around there.
yeah,
Yeah, I know you two had come out at one point. You had like the Power BI tips T-shirt and everything.
probably this one.
Yeah, something like that. And
Sorry.
it was I know it was something on like cool visualization tips and tricks and like kind of like upgrades to the Power BI reports. But and we've both been in the MVP community for a few years. But I know like the thing that you're going to be talking about today. It's pretty interesting to kind of see a lot of the just the fleshing out of this four-part blog series that you recently released. But one thing that I also just wanted to ask is like, if is there anything specific you'd want to fill in people about? Because I would imagine there's a few people in here who might not be as familiar with your website or kind of what you do.
Yeah. Let me do the long intro here. I think just because it's kind of apropos for the topic that we're talking about today,
Sure.
right? Which is more getting into the understanding like all the skills that are involved in the technology of Power BI,
Hmm.
how we build them, and then ultimately represent them. So I think it's important that everybody understands that like we all came from a beginning, right? We didn't just end up on Reed's show with Havens Consulting. you know? So in general, I started on the business side, working with customers to manage data in a custom PIM, so just working within a custom application. But I had some great friends, and when I had an interest to move on above and beyond, they helped me learn SQL. So that kind of started the career in technology, where I was a DBA report author, in the Microsoft stack for, a good 7 or 8 years. And then, when I jumped into consulting is right around the time Power BI came out. So it was
Okay.
kind of a confluence of events around. I had some, interest in the community. I started attending some SQL Saturdays, and I kind of wanted to get into presenting, but I was very intimidated because SQL had been around for forever. And if you go watch speakers and you've never done it before, you think they know everything and anything on any topic,
Exactly.
above and beyond the one they're just giving, which is not the case. So when that all kind of happened, when Power BI came out, they started up the community. So I jumped in with both feet and I started answering a lot of questions on the community, community.powerbi.com, started a Power BI user group, and that's where I met Mike Carlo. And it was kind of you meet people, you just hit it off right away. Mike had started PowerBI.tips as, kind of a blog to just keep track of all the things that he was learning and as kind of a repository. And so ultimately that relationship, grew into, kind of a co-ownership on Power BI.tips. And, we spend a lot of time there creating blogs, videos on our YouTube channel and building tools to help business users. And most recently, I guess, in exciting new news, we haven't really publicized a whole lot, but we started up a podcast that we do on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, but you can also on YouTube, but you can also find that on all of the, podcast channels. It's called Explicit Measures. And it's Tommy Puglia, myself, and Mike, and we just it's a lot more banter around the things we as professionals deal with on a regular basis using Power BI. So it's more of a fun, loose conversation that we have a lot of fun with. So,
and I've loved the number of people who've done that recently. I think it really kind of adds to a connected feeling within the community. Certainly. The few that I've listened into have been fun with you guys. Even some of the guest spots that you do, like non-podcasts, with just having people on, and some of the series that you guys have released has been great. And Lars obviously has that pretty awesome one, and of course John and Jason with the bifocal. So there's a nice healthy amount of good quality content to either watch or listen to within Power BI, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Having fun. Right.
Yeah, I mean that's honestly, I benefit just as much from doing these live streams. As I mentioned to you, it's like that even the viewers tune into. I get to connect with the community. The number of people that I have known through chat but never actually talked to, as I think you're my 33rd, 34th live stream that I've done with people this year, and I feel a lot more connected, and at least at a conversational level, know a lot more people, and I usually learn something from every single podcast that goes on. So it's a lot of fun for me. I really enjoy doing these. I look forward to these on Friday. So I don't always look forward to recording a video. Okay, it's a Tuesday. All right, what's it? I need something that I can, like a 5-minute fun video I can record. But that takes time and editing. This is the only work comes from creating a couple thumbnails and making sure that there's correct formatting and punctuation in the description. Other than that, it's it's laid back, and I just get to hang out with cool people like you.
Well, feelings mutual. It's likewise, but yeah, I mean the intent of the podcast and things like that is to stay connected, and we realized that ultimately we were having a lot of these conversations with each other anyway. So why not just have the conversation in front of people and hopefully bring some value, because you do when we're talking about these things and sharing ideas, and in our podcast sometimes arguing a little bit about different implementation strategies. I always take away something that I hadn't thought about before, so it's a lot of fun.
I do have looks like Joey in the chat, by the way, says he's a big fan of your podcast. So we got at least one listener
cool.
hanging out right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, do you want to give a little background on some of the stuff we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, this 3-part blog series, came from interviewing candidates over 9 months, right? So, during the day, and I should say, and many nights, I'm the director of business intelligence at a company called Syndigo, where we're a data services company, provides platform and services to manage and enhance product information and send it to retailers and recipients across the world. So we have a very lively practice in Power BI, and we've been interviewing a lot of candidates, and ultimately the challenges that I had seen in a lot of these interviews resulted in me wanting to write a blog around representing your Power BI skills. When I started that, I realized I was missing some core pieces, which were just, I think, generalized understandings or misunderstandings of what Power BI meant. And then after I wrote, kind of the skills, or kind of breaking that down for people, like all of the different technology areas that roll up under this, moniker of Power BI, what do you do with them? Great, I have skills, but how do I build them? And a lot of people, you need some reminders or recommendations on how you can, take yourself from place A to place B, and those were kind of the contextual parts that led up to representation. So I think in general today, our conversation is going to be, around those three areas, and some of the insights that I've learned along the way, and hopefully people find some value in the conversation.
It's always a double, like interviewing in general is a double-edged sword. I'm sure, as you know, like there's a lot you can learn from it, but there's also a lot of frustrations. But I'm glad that you took the energy that came out of that and crafted it into something that can be kind of transferable and be useful to other people. I'm sure it will be. I don't think there's ever been anything that I've read on your site and that I've looked at like, man, this is completely worthless.
Well, I suppose that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's a recommendation to go check out a site, that would be it, right?
Yep.
It's not totally worthless. You might find some value, hopefully.
Isn't there? Oh, it just makes me think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. No, it's mostly harmless. I was thinking it was mostly useless, but that was mostly harmless. Was Hitchhiker's Guide? That's the description of Earth, and that as a small nerd reference that popped into my brain. I can transition over to the website. It looks like I got you have one of the articles up, so I'll pop over there.
Yeah, so this is the first blog, right? Assessing knowledge in Power BI skills, right? So one of the things I did in this blog was come up with a matrix, right? A skills matrix, and there's room for improvement here. If you our listeners or your watchers right now have some recommendations on different things we could focus on or add in here, all ears. But ultimately, Reed, if you're well aware, right, ETL, right, like Power Query, right, like so there's a whole platform within the desktop that is specific around connecting to different data, transforming it in simple as well as extremely complex ways. And that tool set in M and the languages around that are a thing in and of themselves, right? Modeling, analysis services underneath the covers, right? So facts and dimensions, or linking objects or tables together in columnar storage, understanding that whole ecosystem as a platform that's been around for, how long in enterprise systems. That is now what you're dealing with, on your local PBIX file. How do you create measures, calculations on top of that? DAX, right? DAX. It is the thing that probably is most talked about because it's the most complex, right? But the power behind it is phenomenal, and it's how we're able to represent and do so many of these contextual switches and filter context, behind the scenes things that report developers or analysts do for end users that is not so simple. And then you kind of dovetail into, a completely different branch of where, because we have the capabilities in the tool, visualization, choosing the right visualization based on data, like that, interacting with the business user and making sure you're defining the requirements correctly, aligning, their expectations to reality. And then UI UX, right? A whole element of how do we design a report page? What are the different things we can do with themes? How do I interact with buttons and bookmarks and set these different experiences for end users based on what people want to see? And it gets really kind of hairy or interesting, I should say, when you start to use Power BI as the reporting embedded layer within an application, where the application already has a look and feel to it, and you need to mimic or mirror, a report to act like an application page. We joke with Mike all the time because this is kind of his word, is Power BI is, building application pages now. But in some context, it's very real. And then finally, just administration, architecture, implementation, licensing, capacity, like all of these things are part of what recruiters or general analysts or anybody, thinks about when we just say this word Power BI. right? So this was kind of the exploration in the foray of like separating out these particular areas, and then kind of stack ranking what are the potential, parts of them that are the learning steps of how you would potentially rate yourself in, one of these columns. So I'll
Giving
take
you
a break there.
giving you like an overall, kind of a score, an assessment, based off of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, I was just like, I like that because not only do you get a kind of like twofold. I think you're already going to have your own kind of assessment of that person, but it allows a person to kind of do a self-rating of themselves, probably in a lot of quadrants of their skill set that they might not have thought of, because this breaks that out into so many different parts. I just want to make sure I dropped the link into the chat window for people as well if they wanted to check that out. What he's showing on to here. Yeah, and like a couple of people are just appreciating this chart, but I like the approach to be able to come at this from somebody doing their own assessment perspective rather than you trying to, milk water from a rock, so to speak.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
The fun thing about, I guess the context of, this blog in particular is it serves that purpose, right? First, the person looking at this chart, like, where do my skills fit? And if I'm going to throw a number on there, where would that be? And then it also serves the purpose of, like, I'm a recruiter or an HR person. We're trying to find Power BI people. Like, what are the things that I'm talking to our developers or our managers around, like, that they need focused areas on, right? Because those needs are different. So if somebody is, being pegged for an engineer role, right, and they're going to be doing modeling in DAX, well, those are the really important things that they want to key in on with potential candidates, because that's what they need a lot of work in, versus, maybe an analyst in a business unit that needs really good Power Query skills, because you're going to be connecting to so many various sources, and your ETL pipe is going to be directly within Power BI. So this was designed to kind of segment that, and then serve a third purpose, which was, we always ask way more questions than we could potentially get answers for in an interview. So we go through just a simple rating, like have a candidate rate themselves. And you have, obviously, the inflation of numbers. But, if there's a standardization or some sort of, lexicon of, like, people going and looking at something, this was kind of to start that conversation of, like, hey, maybe we could have a matrix of skills where if I'm going to send this to a potential candidate or, something to that effect, where they could properly rate themselves on here, because you're not a Marco Russo. Right? Like that.
Yeah.
It's just we're not interviewing you at that level. I can guarantee it.
I'm checking a question to see if there's actually one to pop up. Matthias just had a question about how do you win SQL users for the idea kind of DAX and M and Power BI. I guess that's like if they're probably in a transitional role, but I'm trying to get a little clarification on that maybe before having us dig into it.
Yeah, I mean, in general, like, you can clarify. In general, how do you win SQL? SQL users are typically not going to hit a ton of Power Query. Like, if you're already in SQL, it's likely you're doing your ETL in other places. But there is absolutely a shift of choosing the right things to put in the back end, but not choosing the back end to solve DAX problems. Right? And I think sometimes the very heavy SQL folks make the mistake of trying to put too much into the back end, whereas it's better served to learn the front end DAX calculations and make those visual changes a lot easier on the front end.
There was, I think it was Matthew Roach that said this is transformations and views and other stuff like that should be done as upstream as possible, downstream as necessary. And I liked that analogy, but with, it's a consultant answer for so many things. It depends, because I've had a lot of people ask, should it be in SQL? Should it be in Power BI? Well, like, that depends on where your expertise lies. If you have a database but have nobody who knows how to write SQL, you're going to be using Power Query. It's an easier language to learn, honestly. But if you have
Right.
an expert in both, there's going to be conversations you have around, well, this view that's being made, is it only servicing this model, or is it going to service other could it be used in other environments today, or could it be used in other environments in the future? If either of those is yes, it's a good chance you should have that as a view to be accessed by other sources or touch points somewhere in there. But it's always a mixture of the two. It's a kind of a Venn diagram. Power Query is not designed to replace SQL. SQL doesn't replace Power Query. They work together to do a mix of some transformations that exist in SQL, and then the bit of extra polish to get it across the finish line sometimes is necessary in Power Query. And then, of course, as the developers go. So it's a nice little kind of ebb and flow between the two of them within each organization.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I think ultimately, the skills matrix and this initial aspect of things, kind of touches on what are the specific skills that you would need for different job roles, right? So data engineering, as I mentioned, analyst, architect, am I a Power BI developer? Do I go into the data science aspect of things? Am I hitting R within Power BI? Am I doing a lot of heavy ML before getting into and using some of the AI features? All of those are kind of part and parcel of the technologies and skill sets that are required depending on the role. And Steve Campbell wrote a good article, on our site around that's kind of dovetailed in his Power BI architecture and a data solution, where he touches on starting to marry some of these skills up to some of those particular roles. But I didn't want to invest heavily in as it related in this kind of outline, but more specifically just to be a conversation starter of accurately looking at where my skill set is so that I know where I stand before I try to move on somewhere.
Completely agree.
So where would you rate yourself in the skills matrix, Reed?
I'd probably be like 10. In the ones and threes, across most of those. I actually have a hard time ever giving myself like full tens, like in self-assessments, like because to me, if it's a 10, I'm completely mastered of it. Like there's not really much left that I have to do unless the product changes or evolves. And there's always there's always room for improvement. So I'd normally give myself like, if anything, like the highest I had on most of self-assessments is usually 9s. I find that I really do a 10 because I don't know, something about it just like, that's a little arrogant. Come on, like there's a little room for growth, like 9.5, somewhere in between.
Right on. So any other questions before we kind of move on to, what do we do after you kind of level set? Where am I at before we move into, what do we building ideas?
I think we're good. We had some interesting just side chatter about some of the stuff regarding developers and all that other thing, but nothing specifically about this. So I think we're good to move on.
Cool. So I'm just pulling up the blog, but while we kind of talk about the next thing, right? Like when you start moving past, I understand like where I rate myself, and that's purely not to choose, inflate where you're at. It's just where do I need to focus my time? And I think the thing that I want to stress in this, and I do in the blog as well, is if you want to be like good at your job or move into a new role or be looked at as somebody who understands what's going on, you need to adopt what I call like a learning mentality.
I do have one quick question that somebody had, I think, which is a clarification. You mentioned and I'll pop it on the screen. What did you mean by step 5 in the left column?
Step 5 in the left column.
I'm assuming they were referring to what you said, unless there was I think they were referring to something that you might have said just like a minute or so ago. Oh, sorry, step 6.
So I mean, if we look at levels on the left-hand side, right? Like it's a good question. How would I explain the way the matrix is, right? So we basically have, as columns on the top, the different particular skill sets and areas. And then what we've done is going from top to bottom, starting off on the easier concepts and where to start, and moving down towards more advanced concepts. So the further down you're going in a column, the more advanced or the more you know about a particular skill area, and you would rate yourself higher. So if you wanted to, look at this skills matrix and, say 5 by 10, it's a, 2 points. I think I say in the blog, 2 points per cell, and that gives you a percentage of where you are overall, if you like the numbers kind of game. So that's kind of what it was designed to do, is just throw some numbers, but just more equate and level set where you're at.
Okay. She had, I guess, one other follow-up question from Allison then. For step 60, what are pitfalls of Power Query steps?
It's a great. What are some pitfalls? Like the ones right off the top of my head would be blank. Adding in like adding filters way at the end. Doing the same type of transform multiple times throughout each step. And
probably the worst perpetrators of that are renaming and changing data type.
Mm-hmm.
You see the five versions of each, and you have 30 steps instead of 5.
Yep, it's exactly right. So consolidating a lot of the same types of things that you're putting into each one of the really long steps are some of the challenges around removing time it takes to process stuff. Depending on your connection type, there are other things we can do. What is the thing I'm thinking of? We talk all the time. Am I pushing back into the SQL Server?
Yeah, exact query folding. I like to think of it as it's the can that you're kicking down the road, because eventually you're going to kick and miss, but you want to see how many kicks you can get it down in terms of applied steps. And every time it's kind of you do
exactly.
it, and then you check to see if the view query folding. That's going to eventually, because now in Power Query Online they have all the icons that tell you what type of query folding it is. I cannot wait until that comes to desktop. It makes it so easy, and it also makes it a little confusing because there's 5 different types of icons. It is query folding. It's probably query folding. It might be query folding. It's not query folding, or actually, I don't even know if it's query folding. There's 5 different icons, so that's it's a step forward, but also it's going to be confusing for some people.
Right.
But yeah, I think everything you said, 100%. And the thing that I've actually liked to use is there's for other. It normally represents something else, but the initial FFS that people use on Twitter and stuff, I like to think of that in Power Query as filter first. Seriously,
that's a good acronym, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Filter should always be, regardless of data source. That's probably one of the number one things you should do as soon as you possibly can, depending on transformations. That should be one of the earliest things you do as a pitfall, to prevent a pitfall. Yeah. I think that's good though. We answered our questions, so I think we're good to move on.
Cool. So, like I was saying, adopting a learning mentality, and that just means being curious, right? Like taking the next step in Power BI in your job, right? If you're it's the difference between just doing what the current request is at work, and not being curious about how do you learn more DAX so you understand the language more, so it's easier for you to create a new measure as opposed to hitting the community or Google to get the answer all the time, right? And there's a huge difference between just doing what we do on our daily job and being curious about learning more about the technology to be better at things, to kind of self-improve. And that's where a lot of, I think, the context of hopefully this blog series comes out is this is kind of a self-improvement thing, right? It is. If you're reading our blog, you already are curious, right? So this next step is what are ways we can recommend that have worked for us or me, right? So the ironic thing with this is one of my first things that posted on here is pick a time and schedule it. And when I wrote this, I had to take, it was one of those very serious look at yourself in the mirror kind of thing. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I've allowed myself to be like completely enveloped and distracted with things, and I lost sight of some of the things that I find very personally valuable, related to, you know, keeping plugged in, writing blogs. Like, this series was a part of that. Schedule it, make sure I'm doing what I want to be doing on a daily basis or a weekly basis to, you know, keep advancing, you know, what I know, how I can improve myself, and improve, you know, my skills within the Power BI framework and ecosystem.
Exactly.
So ultimately, you know, what are other recommendations I make in here, right? Like choosing the area of focus, you know, depending on your skill sets. Like, so we talked a little bit about the different roles, right, within, you know, all of these skills, and people are going to land in different places. So choosing the right area based on where you may have ranked, like that skills matrix was just to provide a, hey, do you know how to do that? Or we would expect you would know how to do this. And hopefully that, like, you know, pings people to, you know, look into maybe a particular area they didn't know or haven't had practical experience around. And then, you know this, I mean, I didn't put it in any of my notes, but don't just read it, do it, right? I mean, especially when it comes to Power Query and DAX, like, there's no greater learning that you're going to get out of Power BI or these languages and skills than actually just getting into it and solving problems.
You know, and I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that you guys do it with some of your blogs, and like almost every video that I do a tutorial on, as long as it's a file that can be shared, you know, outstanding of like live connection things that doesn't really work, I try to give an example file that they can just download. So, hey, you watched it, go poke around in it, figure it out, and learn from there. So that's the best way to learn. And you know, if I don't do that, otherwise I would get like 1,000 people, of course, wanting, like, where's the file? I want to go play around with it. This is how I want to learn.
Right. You know, but if you think about like a lot of the videos that we do, the challenges or blogs that we write, it's all direct experience, right? You look at like the community at large, people who are blogging or putting things out there are likely doing things that are directly related, or it's a result of what they're directly working on at the time.
100%.
Right? You're just sharing what you learned with a wider audience. You know, so in general, I mean, it just serves so well to get into the guts of things. Like, I love Gil Raviv's book, Connect, Transform. It's a very long title, but on Power Query, because what he did in that book is he probably spent just as much time creating files and these specific Power Query problems that he solves in his book than he did writing the book, because every exercise has something you can pull up on your screen and walk through practically, which just reinforces the learning that you're doing. And it's the same thing that I love those types of books, right? Where they're put in a way that you can go test against something right away. And I think Marco does that as well in his DAX books as well. You know, laying out the practical application against a sample data set that you can go test. And I would highly recommend that people do that as they're going along and learning something.
I had a really good question about like both reading and and learning and self-improvement. Interesting conversation going on about this, but like, if you have people who would want to use company time to do learning and reluctant to do so outside of work, I think it could be a very also triggering question for some people. But if your company is expecting you to learn and also expecting you to learn outside of work, I do not like. I would not say that's something I'm a fan of for an organization. Like, you're basically asking people to take their personal time off to do self-improvement. I think that any company should provide some amount of time for that so an employee can get better. Separately, if a person just happens to like their career and, you know, on their downtime is wanting to read up something, not because there's any requirement at all, they're just curious about learning for something. I think that's totally fine. And almost anybody that I've met who's skilled in the industry normally does a bit of that. But I think like almost like company approved and or company requested learning should definitely be done within the hours of that. Otherwise, you're asking them to go above and beyond the workday at that point, and it cuts into life and happiness.
I would say these are two different topics, right?
Okay.
One is where I'm gearing a lot of, or I should say, where I've merged in a lot of things in this blog, which is personal development.
Yeah.
You improving yourself to better your life or your circumstances in whatever job you're doing.
Yep.
And these are the steps that I recommend in order to ultimately showcase those skills. I do agree on the flip side, right? The assessment can be made in, if everybody's on the same page, that you came in as a person with these skill sets. Ultimately, even where I'm at now, I would 100% agree. I'm looking for my team members to be able to be cross-functional, but in order for them to be cross-functional, like, I need to give them the time. Like, I'm not going to hold them to the same standards that I have of my expert in that area, right? So there's a difference between, like, if I have a modeling guy and that's all he does,
yeah.
but I need him in one project to learn to use Power Query, but he's not familiar with it. Of course, it's on me to say, I'm not going to hold you to the same timelines of getting this done, because you need to learn this stuff, right? So yeah, I would agree with that from the standpoint that if you have a deliverable for a business, they should allow you that time to ramp up. But that's also part of being an FTE somewhere. You have that growth and development in an organization, because as opposed to being the expert that you get plugged in as a consultant or something to come in and solve problems, specific to your skill set. You should learn, and the company should support that.
Yeah, and like, even as a consultant who, essentially for myself and anybody else who, does contract work, there's a fine line also, as well as, like, if I have to learn something, like, is that something that's billed to the client? Is that something because I'm benefiting from it long term? Do I not? I've actually had conversations with a client where they're asking me to do something like that's outside of my wheelhouse. The learning is not going to, if I'm reading articles and stuff, it's not part of the time, but the development itself will be slower. So either A, I can do it, but it will be more time, or B, I can find somebody else for you. And a lot of them are like, I trust you. I get that it will take a little bit more time for you, but that's totally fine. But it's still that conversation that needs to be had of, like, what falls under company time versus personal time.
Sure. Yep.
Like,
any other questions?
No, there was one other that not directly related to the don't read it, do it, but it was a really interesting question from Marco that I actually liked, where for career development, having 5 or 6 in all, or having 9 or 10 on 1 or 2, I actually think you somewhat touched on this, where the difference between your modeling expert and the jack of all trades kind of a person. And I think depending on the project and the role needed, both are good to have. Sometimes you want a person who is the modeling person, but doesn't really know jack about, like, the report environment necessarily, but they're the person who will be able to build you a model with 1 billion rows that's optimized. Individuals like myself and you, probably, we need to be able to have a few more cross-platform skill sets. But yeah, I'm curious, like, your take on it.
Yeah, I think that's where the stepping stone of Steve Campbell's article comes in, right? To outline what roles in a business these skill sets align to. And, to answer this question, as far as career development, it would depend on which career role you want to aim for, right?
Yes.
If you want to be the guy that goes into a business unit and can build anything, well, you need to know the spectrum of skills. If you want to be the BI engineer that gets to spend all your time in modeling, then analysis services and DAX is where you need to spend most of your time. And you go really deep into those, as opposed to learning cross spectrum, across all the skill sets. So you're widely varied. Me personally, I'm kind of the guy that, even when Power BI came out, I need to understand the whole ecosystem. So I'm much more a jack of all trades kind of guy that has dive deeply into certain areas, but by no means am I an expert in some of these areas within Power BI.
Yeah, like jack of all trades / like full stack developer, but
Master of none, right?
or yeah, but I think there's definitely a special grouping for a lot of the MVPs who, and anybody who runs a business, honestly, like you either have to specialize to the degree that people will hire you for very specific jobs, or most of the time you are an end-to-end developer. They say, hey, I need Power BI stuff, but I need you to kind of wear the hat of everything. Gathering the requirements
Right.
through publishing it and then setting up our tenant, from there. But it is hard sometimes. Like there's a bit of a stress level where I love to learn new stuff, but like as Power BI has grown, it's also definitely become a little harder in the last couple of years to really be familiar with everything, pricing, infrastructure, embedding, all of this stuff. I've gotten to the point now where one of I think the hardest things to learn, either from an interview perspective as an employer or anything else, is just being able to say I don't know. And I had to learn the hard way doing that teaching. But sometimes you just need to be honest, like, hey, that's just not my specialty. I'm not going to try to like pretend that it is and go learn it. Moonlighting. It's if you need something done in that area, it's best recommended that I go get somebody like you, or hey, you want embedding? I'm going to go get Mike Carlo, and he's going to be able to help you with that because he loves to do that type of stuff. You just
Yep.
you just need to be transparent and I think confident enough to be able to say we don't know, and people resonate really strongly with that because it builds a level of trust versus trying to stumble over your words to fake it till you make it kind of with certain topics.
I'm a huge proponent of just being real, right?
Yeah.
I'm a guy who's like, yeah, no, I don't know. Like, so I think conversations in general are much more fruitful and you're outlining exactly why, right? You instill trust in people. They believe, you and are more apt to probably use you in the future over somebody else because they know you're a straight shooter, in some respects.
Completely agree.
So some of the other, things I recommend is, starting, trying to get people involved in the community. Asking and answering questions on the community site when I first started was probably one of the best learning experiences for me across spectrums that I had no idea. Like Power Query and DAX were brand new, right? I was an enterprise guy with SQL skills and a little bit of tabular model, like just touching that when Power BI came out. And having this cross spectrum of like so many people asking questions and wanting to answer them all, I was researching all the time, just to help people out. So it was that's a great way to learn, is practically trying to apply and help other people do it. As right? One of the best ways to be an expert on a topic, speak on it. Go find a user group and say, hey, I've never spoken before, but these small settings, I'm passionate about, these two DAX equations, and build a presentation around it. I guarantee you will learn it to a degree that you never thought possible.
Oh, I agree. And just as I mentioned, the user group that I do, we've had a couple of times over the years where we have to give people that opportunity who are nervous to speak, instead of a full hour, have 3 or 4 of them come up and they get 10 or 15 minutes. Little mini things like, hey, just doesn't even matter the topic. Just come up and talk about something for 15 minutes. Every one of us that's spoken had a first time. And I've yet to meet anybody who has said confidently, like, oh yeah, the first time it was fine. I was super confident. I felt like I knew it. Like, no, you're sweating bullets internally, maybe physically. Like it's almost nobody is comfortable the first time they go up and speak in front of people, but you get there. It's something that comes with time
and practice, right? You gotta get over the heebie-jeebies and do it. But yeah, that is absolutely one of the things that we've offered and few take, which is, give me a 15-minute pitch, basically, or just tell people what you did. So that's a great way. I recommend, starting a blog, and that's more community focused. But if you don't want the community type thing, at least start a repository of your own information, right? Like PowerBI.tips was started because Mike wanted to keep track of all the things he was learning. And I cannot tell you how often we go back to our own site for the things that we worked through at a point in time because we know we blogged about it, but we have to solve it again, right? So it is never ending cycle of learning, right? And rehashing and going back to something that you solved already. So
Yep.
don't waste the time that you are using when you solve problems. Like, build yourself that cheat sheet or that lexicon of where you can go back and reference some of the things you already solved.
I've lost count of the number of times that, because all those example files that I make for every video, I go at least once a week to one of the like hundreds of files that I have, and I'll grab out like the little thing that I did from there and reuse that in a scenario that I'm building out. It's super useful as a repository, and then everything else gets dumped into OneNote in various tabs and and stuff just to give yourself a reminder. It's the term that I learned from Power Pivot Pro that they might still use in their trainings is be kind to your future self. Do today, don't do the lazy thing is I'm not going to document. I'm not going to add a note to this stacks measure. No, if it's something that you look at it and like, man, this is complex, type 2 sentences in there to say what you did and why. Because in 6 months, you're probably not going to remember what this was, and you're going to spend 30 minutes debugging it to try to remember exactly why this was done this way.
Exactly. Yeah, and one other thing I'll touch on before we kind of move to the next section is I don't know how many people know, but like it wasn't too long ago that Power BI added in the sample feature set. So in Power BI, it is so easy to go test a DAX query or something that you're reading, because you don't have to muck around with going and building your own data set anymore. It's just built into the tool. So open it, click into the sample data set, load it, and do something. So super useful, not only for personal learning, but also for interviewing people.
Exactly, I completely agree.
So anything else on kind of this section before we move into where I ultimately wanted to be from the start with all of this?
I just one comment from Marco. He's like, thanks for the great answers. It's been really helpful.
Awesome. So, like I said, this is this last blog of how do you represent your skills, right? Or the recommendations that I had for people that I've been interviewing and still am, right? If I was gonna say, hey, if it didn't work out, but I would recommend you do all these things. So the first of those is all of this is designed to be distinctive, right? Like if I asked you, Reed, how would you accomplish sharing what skills you have in a 30 to 60 minute interview? If nobody knew who you were, what would you tell them?
Oh, it's an interesting thing to have to condense it down to that much, but honestly, like I'm assuming this is just like a presentation, basically, that you're giving, or like in an interview process, just conveying what you know. Yeah.
Let's say nobody knows who you are.
Yeah.
How would you convey to me, if I was interviewing, like everything that you've done in 30 to 60 minutes or no, right? Ultimately it's, you're interviewing for a job, and all this conversation is about is understanding your level of expertise.
Honestly, I've told it a lot of times now, but the Power BI journey that I got to where I has a lot of key learnings where there are multiple moments where I could have basically taken an easy route, but I instead chose to take a leap of faith. Like the 30-second thing that I'll add as just a snippet to there is, I got offered a teaching position at Bellevue College, like to teach advanced Excel, like 3 months after I started using Excel, and that terrified me. But I also like, man, this is going to be a good skill to learn, so I jumped into it, and I love teaching now. But I think I like to tell my learnings through the path of where I chose to act on an opportunity, which I think speaks both to some of the skills that I have, especially with the fact that I've been able to teach, but also it shows the motivation and risks that I was willing to take. But it comes out naturally rather than like, hey, let me go. I should know this term. It's where you whiteboard code on, which I personally hate. By the way, there's a level of muscle memory from typing and using a mouse that comes out in code, and IntelliSense and DAX. Anytime you have to write that down, I don't think it's a good way to assess somebody's skill on codes, especially when there's people almost everybody codes with some kind of shorthanding or tabbing or other stuff, and it's hard to translate that to written form. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a long story short. Like that's how I think I'd summarize myself is go through the journey of what I've done, and I think that highlights a lot of key components that are necessary.
So I'm gonna take this a step further, and say, in that journey, what is the byproduct of all of those choices that you've made?
Whatever's
The byproduct.
yeah, yeah. Well, for me, certainly is. Oh, are you asking, or was that a rhetorical?
Well, I'm asking, and then I'll fill in.
Okay, yeah. For me, my number one learning that is the byproduct is there were so many times that something seemed completely terrifying to do, and it wasn't. And I think the best thing is that, like, I now have enough of that, at least career wise, is like every time something seems pretty scary, like, oh no, I have plenty of memories now to prove it might seem like that, but it really isn't going to be as bad as it is. The first time you publicly speak isn't as bad as you think it's going to be. The first time you have to tackle a large like enterprise model, not well, that actually might sometimes be bad, but either way, a good outcome comes from it almost every time, as long as you put the effort and motivation into it.
So I appreciate you playing along with me here, right?
Yeah.
Because in this question of how do you accomplish, like, in 30 to 60 minutes telling somebody your level of expertise, is you don't. You do it all beforehand, right? If I asked you this question a little bit more pointedly, what you could do is you could say, well, to show my level of expertise in this area, you can go check out my YouTube channel where I have 50 videos. You can go check out my blog where I've written 100 articles on all of these things showing my level of expertise. You can check out my community where I've written thousands of answers to do XYZ, and you can check out what a Microsoft MVP means, that I'm doing this stuff all the time and I'm actively engaged. So I don't, as an interviewer, need to look at you, Reed, and go, well, I don't believe you. I can go look at everything you've done, right? And
that's fair.
Does everybody take it to the level that we do, meaning create community-wide content all the time? No. And I'm not suggesting that everybody wants to do that. What I am saying is, through this, if personal growth and improvement is something that you're interested in, you already have a repository of things that you can talk about or show that sets you apart from other people, because that's what you're trying to do when you interview or when you're trying to make that next step in your career. Is you don't have to convince somebody, you just show them what you've done.
A good paraphrase of that is having your name should precede you, and essentially have an online presence to a degree. And I like your idea of learning and growth. And yes, there's a lot of people who will not get to the having a YouTube channel necessarily, or a blog. Those do take more time. You need websites, but a really, really easy way, I think, to have expertise is the community forums that you talked about. You just need to log in, and if you're somebody who's answered 40 or 50 questions and has had the verified answer on that's a great, look, I've actually answered quite a few questions, and people have voted my answer as a good answer for this. That's an immediate and pretty quick win to both learn and then have a bit of a digital paper trail to just to show some expertise that can confirm confidence in somebody on your skill sets.
Right. And ultimately, I'm a huge proponent of community. I'm a huge proponent of sharing what you know, but I'm not saying you have to be, that type of person or put your content out there. I am saying that I do think that it's worthwhile to, represent and share, have a Power BI file, right? Have a Power BI report that represents your skills. I will say, one of my top employees, part of my team, love the guy. Part of the reason he got his interview was not his resume. It was the link to the published to web Power BI report where he built his resume in Power BI. And I found myself staring at the thing 30 minutes after I had opened it because it was so good. That's what got him the job.
This is a great lead up to this question too. You can finish, but I'll throw this up onto the screen.
Portfolio.
You literally just answered this too, which is actually perfect. They both speak to skills for different reasons, but I think, like you said, the certificate almost with or without it, a well-built report kind of alludes to that to begin with. If you have something that has a lot of, not only is pretty, but actually has some interesting report layer features, plus potentially some like let's just say, advanced stacks that's in there, that kind of already displays that in a way. So it's a two for one. The certificate is nice, but the just being able to see it and play around with it, and like you said, just man, this is really and like I'm actually gonna take some ideas from this. There's some cool stuff that's done in here. Like that sells it.
Yeah, I mean, in the same way, like teeing this up, when you practically are showing your what you know, in my mind, that trumps a certification thing on a resume every time, because you can study for that. And I'm not saying that it doesn't require some skill, but when you show people what you know, as opposed to just having them infer based on a certification, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
I mean, it's the same with school. Like there's such a thing as somebody who tests well, but can they apply it very well? And like there's a big difference between that. The applied one, if available, like a good portfolio, or in this case with Power BI, a couple of published to web reports. I mean, I do that kind of as a selling point to my clients on my website. Almost every report that I sell, and a couple other things, I've peppered my website on a lot of different pages with cool Power BI published to web, so somebody can immediately see that, oh, that's really cool. This person has skills in it. I want to hire them for something. I have one. You can go ahead. Then I'll have a. I was just mentioning I had a fun comment that Matthias just said.
What I was going to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
It's experience for breakfast.
Personality, it's experience for breakfast. I just thought that was really funny, and there is a degree of that. Like you have to sell yourself not only by the bulleted list that you have, but also there needs to be a bit of flavor, both in you, even in Power BI reports. Like there's a level of selling in the visuals and the aesthetics that needs to come through it in any portfolio.
I'm going to address that question, right?
Okay.
And I think while I don't agree with it, and the reason I don't agree with it is
stay up there.
Like in the interview processes that we have, we start with a technical interview that that hits all areas of Power BI. Even if the candidate, we know they're supposed to be good in one or two, because if you can't represent your technical skills, we don't have a personality conversation. I don't have a team fit conversation, because I understand that motivation. If you're telling me that you're the type of individual that learns things quickly, that can adapt and change, and you love that type of environment, then your resume, or these things that I'm saying you should have, should already be part of the conversation, right? Fair. If your personality is these things, then you already have things that represent that, not convincing me on a phone call, right? So while personality is absolutely an aspect of it, team fit, like all of that is very important. This conversation, I think, is specific to skill sets. That's all we're talking about. Why do I recommend this stuff? It's because you are in a sea of resumes. That's ultimately what this comes down to. Is these personal growth steps are also going to serve you in these sorts of environments where you're looking for the next job, where you're looking for the next thing, because the fact of the matter is hundreds of resumes are coming through in different channels, and you need something that sets you apart from people, outside of just keyword searches on, LinkedIn. That may get somebody's eyeballs on your resume, but ultimately it's these other things that are going to get you the interview, and it's going to, ultimately, hopefully lead to, the next step in your career.
Exactly.
Anything else? Otherwise, I'll.
No, you can keep going. I'm loving the conversations and questions that people have been bringing up. I think they're really enjoying the topic, so that's great.
So one of the, now that we've kind of set the stage, now I've made these recommendations. What are some of the challenging things that you want to make sure that you don't do? Right? Don't. What I would recommend is don't embellish. Don't embellish. Right? Your resume, in the words, should match the conversation that you're going to have. If it doesn't, you automatically lose the trust of the interviewer.
You're
If you
telling
tell
me
me that
you're telling me that
know,
I have 10 years of Power BI experience. You're telling me I shouldn't do that?
I'm saying it's probably not a good idea. If you have like under your skill sets, if you have Power Query and you're an engineer on enterprise side and you have ETL pipes in the back end and you the only time you use Power Query is to connect to something and push it through, that's not a skill set. If you opened an application, that's not a skill set, right? Like if we can't have a conversation about the technology that you put as a skill set, you'd be shocked at how often this happens, and it doesn't look good. So don't do it.
I mean, in that case, I'd have PowerShell on mine. And again,
Right.
the only PowerShell that I've ever learned is a couple of scripts that I've gotten from blogs occasionally to do something. But I've written VBA. I wouldn't put VBA on my resume. I know just enough to have done a couple of macros in like Excel workbooks over the years. But I am not at all an expert in the coding language.
So a couple of last things, right? I would say personality comment.
Mm-hmm.
Bring yourself to an interview, right? Like what you need to make sure is that when you're talking to people, if they're making you uncomfortable because they're just grilling you and it's a bad experience, like those are the people that you're going to work with. So bring yourself, and if there's conflicts or you don't like the vibe of the conversation, like then it's probably not a good fit, right? Because the other part of, I think, interviewing that I haven't been on the other side for a while, but I always value in the conversation is you are interviewing the company just as much as they are interviewing you, right? Like you want to find a place that is going to value the skills that you bring, as well as make sure that it's going to be a place where you can learn and grow and, enjoy the job that you have. So ultimately, bring yourself. Don't try to hide behind, the right answer or, to our point before, Reed, where, it's like, I'm a huge proponent of just tell it like it is. If you don't know it, you don't know what that company is looking for, which is also why one of my last question or, points is be inquisitive. If somebody has a job description that says you must have 5 years of Power BI experience, what does that mean? In what area? All of them? Well, the salary requirements should certainly align with all of them then, right? As opposed to, I need a guy who knows Power Query really well and can build some, halfway decent reports, right? Like I don't expect you to be a DAX expert because nothing that we're doing is very complicated above a sum. Right? Those are very back and forth conversations and questions that, people should have to make sure that you're even in the right place, right? Like if you get an interview, and those aren't clearly specified, ask questions. The more questions that you ask about the job, about the role, the skill sets, et cetera, the more you're going to learn as well. Because in many cases, while we do specify, certain areas that we're looking for, maybe the role that we have for you in mind is this, but you exhibit skills that we know our peer over here is looking for, and we may just pass you over to them, right? So be inquisitive in yourself, I guess, are the last things I would say specifically around when you're in the interview process and you actually get to talk to somebody. And
regarding the skill sets too, one thing that I remember learning years ago is be specific about it. It's like I know Power Query. Okay, what does that mean? I used Power Query to help automate a process of combining 500 files from a folder on a monthly cadence. Like, yes, great. Give examples. I helped to reduce query load times in SQL for a few stored procedures by about 30%. Like the very numbers and specifics of examples, I think they immediately allude to like, okay, like this is what you know about this thing, and it helps to, again, like it weeds out the it usually allows you for places that actually automatically kind of separate the resumes. It will help you actually get in the accepted bucket, and then the people who have their eyes on it will then they'll ask you targeted questions, and you already have stories you can talk to.
100% agree. And
Yeah.
without divulging, our interview process, like ultimately think of it in this term, right? If I ask you to rate yourself and you rate yourself at 10, you've guaranteed that I'm going to expect that you can answer the hard questions that I have teed up in my interview. And if you can't, then you're not a 10. So it's always good to kind of underrate yourself and surprise versus, overrate yourself and not be able to answer. But to your point, if an interviewer is asking, do you know how to use Power Query and how you said it, if you say yes, and then we ask you a question that's specific around Power Query and you don't know, right? Like you're instilling a pattern of, well, you just told me that you knew something, but not only do you not know that, the next follow-in is, if you do know that, then it's the specifics that sell your experience. Can you talk about the challenging problem? If somebody's asking you, talk to me about, some of the challenges with using Power Query, right? We talked about those earlier. Somebody asked, What are some of those? Well, you're wasting, you're burning a bunch of, steps, and you're slowing down that process by, performing these actions. Or I had this use case where this specific thing broke, and I spent 5 hours trying to figure this out, and it was this dumb little function over here that solved my problem. That tells me you've used the tool, right? It's when you don't have those like very specific answers that it's harder to determine, did you just read this or, get certified, or do you actually have the experience of working through these challenging problems that present themselves in these tool sets all the time if you're actively working on them?
I want to put this up because there's an interesting conversation that was happening around skill sets, and Mattia seems to think you do not need to know DAX if you're doing data modeling in Power BI. I have an opinion on that. What do you think about that? Because I was saying if you're doing any Power BI model development, you need some combination of Power Query and DAX if you are the only developer.
Yeah, I mean, these go so much hand in hand, right? I mean, you think about like what Marco Russo, right, and Alberto, who can basically write anything in the world in DAX, constantly remind us is, no, shape your model right. Right. So like if you're spending the time in developing the model, like you have to have an understanding of like, what are the needs of the report? What are the requests that are happening that are going to drive towards some of these absurd DAX measures, and maybe adjust and shift things in the model. So I think they're hand in hand. I don't think, you can parse them off and say one's not more relevant than the other. Yeah.
I mean, there's some models that are going to require really advanced Power Query to get the data in. Some of them just require data connection. There's going to be some models that, if you're doing like basic calculations and sums, sure, you can drag and drop a column in, but it's still using DAX, and the shape of the model still can be optimized when you know the language. So it's kind of a both and between the two.
Yeah, and it also, so use case, are you talking about enterprise models as well? Are you going to spend a lot more time or have a little less flexibility in terms? Yeah, right. Performance tuning, huge things you can go into, the needs of the skill sets around both of those. But ultimately, we're serving the business and the business needs, so we need to be as flexible as possible. And those two go hand in hand in producing those results.
Yep. And it's also a difference between where you're applying to. If you're applying to a small SMB for Microsoft terms, but like small to medium businesses, very often they're going to be wanting like a full stack Power BI expert because they're not going to have a team. They need one person who's going to be able to do everything. If you're going to go to work for an Accenture or a large enterprise company that has an entire analytical department, very likely there's going to be positions open where like we need a person who builds this tabular models and Azure analysis services or something. They're never going to touch a report layer. They're just going to do the model development or just the report building or anything else. And so you'll have often much more hyper-focused subsections of Power BI as a role. So it kind of depends on where you land. But I think it's the type of skills that you'll need, broad or focused, I think will be dependent often just on the size of the organization too.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess, in summary, right, that this whole series and, this talk or conversation is really around encouraging people to invest in themselves, and because what I've seen is consistent investment in myself is something that you carry no matter where you're at, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not only hugely beneficial to you in terms of business, but it's also very personally satisfying. So when whatever flavor or form that is, whether it's community driven or just something that you're doing on your own for personal improvement, ultimately this kind of rounds out some of the things that I've learned that I can provide back to other people, in terms of starting the next step in your career, understanding where your skills are, figuring out which direction you want to move in, and then building something that's unique to you, that sets you apart from other people. And ultimately it serves people very well to get the next job, or
Mm-hmm.
put themselves in a position where when you're interviewing, you do stand out.
Exactly. Like at the end of the day, it's like, what can you do to build an identity, or for more like marketing terms, like a brand, something that
Yeah.
makes you unique. Everybody has something. It's like, what is that, and what helps you represent that well? Whether or not it's, as you said, like writing the interview the right way, having information that precedes you online, and anything tech related, some trail online to show a timeline of history of like, oh yeah, this is from 4 years ago, by the way. This is how long I've been doing this. Like that immediately, yeah, hugely valuable. And again, I'll repeat back, like, if people want to know how do I build that, the best first step, at least for Power BI, I think is the community forums. Having a user on there and just answering questions, whether or not it's simple or complex, that really helps to work towards that. And blogs and other stuff are second, but the easiest and least effort is that one, for like a good first step.
Yep. And just start consistency, and incrementally, you'll grow.
Exactly. I did ask if there is anybody else with any questions, so we don't have any at the moment. But overall, like, this is great. Again, I'm even learning some stuff. I now know some of the secrets of your guys' interview process. I do actually like your matrix chart. Honestly, like, good chance the next time I need to hire a developer, because I do occasionally. I might send them that and get them to do a self-assessment, because that is a really useful tool to have.
Well, at least it brings everybody on the same playing field, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What is a 5? What is an 8? Like,
Yeah.
you're saying, all of the things before that, So I hope it is useful for you.
Where you're telling us we should normalize the data, right? And have fair metrics.
Well, it might help in some of the conversations. That's all.
Yes, exactly. There's one other question, but Allison, this is, by the way, this is recorded, so you can go back to the beginning to get our introductions again. So we don't need to redo that, but these are recorded and saved onto the YouTube channel. But overall, is there anything else, Seth, that you want to say before we wrap up for the day?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, like
talking to you, Reed. Good catching up.
Absolutely, and I think with pretty much everybody I've had on so far, I'm happy to have you on again, and I'm sure there will be other stuff in either sometime later this year or next year that you'll have, and some other cool blogs to discuss as you guys continue to pump out cool stuff on Power BI tips. But check out the links below in the description. Lots of cool stuff. The blogs that he specifically mentioned, plus the just the general Power BI tips. And if you have any questions for him, his LinkedIn information's in there, so feel free to just ping him as well. But otherwise, everybody, thanks for tuning in today, and Seth, thanks for joining, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much, Reed.
All right, cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.